Well, it appears that I have once again jumped the gun. A couple of days ago, I have made a rant about the Turok 3 remaster that Night Dive has made, and unfortunately I do have to make some corrections. And I'd rather people actually think for themselves than to believe everything they hear and parrot that opinion, because in my most humble and based opinion, people really like to parrot the opinions of their favorite YouTubers, and that is extremely unhealthy. Now, that being said, let's go over the one comment that I got, and to kind of hammer in a little bit the points I made in my original video. One thing I do want to mention is that the price point of this remaster, I give no fucks on how much a remaster of a game is, whether it's 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old, or even less than 5 with something like The Last of Us 2. Bad pricing is bad pricing. And considering what has actually been removed in this Turok 3 remaster, it's absolutely bad pricing. Okay? That is not justifiable in any capacity, even for the worst game ever made. At least when it comes to the Turok series. Though quite honestly, I would feel that even after the Nintendo 64 era of Turok games, there's just not been one good Turok game. Even putting the nostalgia aside for Turok 2K8, it's just not a good game. And Turok Evolution is already in itself a mixed bag. Not even a GBA port could save that shit. So the comment that I got from, quite frankly, the most interesting profile picture I've ever seen, but considering that they actually left a comment and not just a temper tantrum, I'm going to go ahead and elaborate a little bit, because I did indeed jump the GUN. Alright, enough of that shit. So, as I mentioned, I don't like Turok 2. The main reason I don't really like Turok 2 is, despite the game not being a hyper-linear roller coaster, kind of like with a certain game series that I once cherished and loved forever, it is way too non-linear to the point that it's fucking confusing as fuck to go through, okay? It's absolutely absurd. Even just looking up people playing through the first level alone takes about maybe half an hour to an hour, depending on how good you are at the game. It is not digestible enough to warrant such things. And considering that a lot of people really don't like the level Lair of the Blind Ones, and there's at least maybe 6 or 7 levels in the game, I can't exactly justify that calling it a good game. Okay, it's like those people that say that Dark Souls is the ultimate game of all time, but yet everyone says a lot of shit about the last third of the game. Doesn't exactly make it the ultimate game of all time, but I'll digress just this once. And I don't care if people are going to get mad at me for that. I do not like Turok 2. I don't expect it to be a hyper-linear roller coaster game as with whatever shooter it wants to call itself innovative. I do not like to play games I do not like to play. Okay? I can enjoy a decent, non-linear game if it's digestible enough. If it's a linear game, it has to be enjoyable no matter how many times I go through it. And something like Turok 2, with how long the levels they can be, with how annoying the progression can be, seriously, even just missing one objective and you have to warp all the way back to the beginning of the fucking stage until you clear that shit. Kind of reminds me of a certain game that also tried to do that exact same thing. Even though Turok, the original game, had something like that, even if you were to somehow go through the whole level without finding all the keys, you weren't exactly penalized. The way the level design in the original Turok worked is that you have the one level, essentially a little tutorial as to how things work in the game. And then you have varying paths you can choose in the hub world, which at the start of the game you basically get to go to either level 3 or 2, and depending on what keys you find, you can essentially backtrack if you wish, although that'd be really fucking weird. But considering the way Turok plays, with it having finite weapon spawns and other pickups, you kind of have to play very carefully if you want to conserve your ammo. And with really the only 2 instances of having essentially respawning ammo is during the boss fights, you essentially want to save the Mantis fight before you go to the final level, since you get the last key to level 8, the final confrontation, during said boss fight. But that's just me. Turok 2 has none of that. Okay, and I don't care that the game was innovative for 1998 or that they were pushing the technological system to its limits. No, the frame rate is fucking abysmal and unacceptable for a console shooter even back in 1998. I really don't want to hear it right now. Alright, bitch about the fucking fog all you want, or that games like GoldenEye were not playable because of the fucking controller, okay? As shitty as it was to play a game on the Nintendo 64, especially a first-person shooter to boot, if the game does not run at a decent frame rate, especially how people love to be completely anal and quite frankly autistic about frame rate today, even if you were to play the original Turok in GoldenEye, assuming your standards aren't exactly set to the absolute standards today, you could still play those games no problem. Playing Turok 2 doesn't get that luxury, with or without the memory expansion. And I don't want to hear that Night Dive fixed it either, okay? Putting a band-aid for a waypoint system, that's just really shitty, retarded level design logic right there, okay? I know someone's gonna be like, oh, well, the original Turok wasn't exactly better either. If you have to put a little waypoint system just because the level design is that fucked,
isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
Now that the Turok 2 slander is out of the way, let's get back to the actual point at hand. A lot of content from Turok 3 was cut in the remaster, when usually Night Dive Studios does at least add in something to keep players wanting more that wasn't even the original version. Doom 64 not only implemented quick saves and quick loads, which completely trivialized the design of the original system, but considering Doom 64 never had a official PC port, I guess it's one thing, and that the lost levels were essentially a new expansion that you could play through for the very first time, never before seen in the original game. Now, I don't agree with it essentially bridging the gap between Doom 64 and Doom 2016, but that's another ordeal entirely. Even something like Forsaken, that really weird, whatever the hell genre that isn't Metroid Prime the Guidance series, first-person adventure, whatever the fuck, voiced by John St. John, and no, I'm not making that up. It has levels from both the Nintendo 64 version and the PC version that is unbearably playable unless you have the original software to run that shit on. And there's levels exclusive to the remaster version. Or even something like Power Slave, or whatever the hell name you're playing it on, depending on what version you're playing. Okay, there's some people who prefer the Saturn version, or some people who prefer the PlayStation version, and Night Dive essentially took ideas from both and essentially made it one whole game. Now that's how you do a fucking remaster. You take what works, what doesn't work, and you mash it together, or just add a new content to a game that's already good. They didn't do that with Turok 3. And as much as they detest Turok 2, at least they implemented the multiplayer that was in the original version, alright? Turok 2 was the first game in the series to have multiplayer, albeit locally, and being able to play as Tal Set, it was pretty alright. And then they completely removed it in the console versions, leaving the only option to play online, which is another ordeal, and they're just completely removing it in the Switch version for no fucking reason. And I don't want to hear that people didn't play that version, so why would they bother implementing that? That is a shitty argument, and you know it. Alright, it's this lack of care to preserve something that actually matters is why you can't even play something like the Uncharted multiplayer or even the Assassin's Creed multiplayer, okay? There are people who have actually played that and actually enjoyed it. And the fact that these developers these days can't even bother remastering that one aspect of the game is why a lot of great multiplayer games will be lost to time, because people who develop these games and can't even bother remastering that shit, it's just a recipe for disaster. And whether it implements online netcode or not adding that part does not justify the $30 price tag. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Even though I completely was uninterested in playing through the Turok 3 multiplayer because Rage Wars just does it all the better, and I might be a little biased since I play a lot more Rage Wars multiplayer than Turok 3 multiplayer or even Turok 2 multiplayer. But just the fact that the argument of nobody played the multiplayer back then, so it's no surprise Night Dive didn't implement it, is a really shitty argument, and an otherwise coherent argument that isn't just throwing a fucking temper tantrum because a person online said they don't like Turok 2. And I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for that, but I don't care. I don't like Turok 2. If I want to play Turok, I'll just play the original. Turok 2 is not digestible enough even with the cheats. And that's another thing. Turok 3 not having the easily accessible cheat system via the password system is really shitty. But it turns out that as with Turok 2, you actually can unlock the cheats. It's just not readily accessible. You essentially have to go through the game and unlock the cheats that way. Though, why the hell would you remove the fucking password feature to actually allow access to the cheats? Even with the original game essentially doing this too, except the one where you unlock Joshua Fireseed, which is the name of the character, by the way. I kind of fucked up on that part. Even Acclaim back then kind of rushed that shit, because apparently you go through Danielle's path, but having Joseph Fireseed, yeah, that's his name, Joseph Fireseed's hurt voices or whatever, but having access to both the characters' weapons. Essentially feels like a really weird hybrid of the two. It's just really weird. But even with that shit, you essentially have to play for the game on Oblivion twice and without dying. So the game at least keeps track of how many times you died, kind of like a certain video game that people love to hate on, but reminder, they literally advertise that shit. I'll digress. Just the fact that you essentially have to go for the game on hardest difficulty twice, playing it perfectly, just to unlock a third playthrough of a game that's not even that good, yeah, it kind of says something. But I'm not going to hold against the original for that, since, as I said in the original, you could easily emulate it, but even with being able to pay $30 for a remaster, you would expect a lot more quality from Night Dive, but I think after this release, Night Dive's quality is going to take quite the dive into the night. Alright, that was a really shitty pun, but I don't care, because that is the truth. Whether Turok 3 is good or not, it does not deserve this kind of treatment from an otherwise decent developer. Because, truth be told, a lot of developers who do take the time to remaster these older games, they usually end up flubbing it. Hell, Metroid Prime Remastered was a thing. You know, that Gaiden series, Metroid? Yeah. That didn't even include the fucking fusion suit, which was literally a thing that you got by connecting Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime together via the Game Boy Advance link. And you couldn't even be bothered to do that. When the fucking shitty versions on the Wii that force motion controls have actual restored content, you know you done fucked up. And I'm sure someone's going to justify that too, and I really don't give a shit. Even that one was overpriced, considering that it didn't even have the other Metroid Prime games that people actually give a shit about. Even the so-called multiplayer Metroid Prime 2 that nobody cares about. It was even kept in the Wii port of Metroid Prime 1 and 2 because it was in the original game. I'll take the commenter's word that the original Turok 2 PC port isn't that good, and I'm sure the original Turok port isn't even that good to begin with. And I'm going to throw in a little addendum in here too, but recording footage just for Turok 2, even with the Magipacks download. I had to find a visible cursor icon to download because for whatever fucking reason the damn holographs would be imprinted on the game, and I don't want to be that kind of person that just has the mouse cursor on a video of a game playing, because that is so fucking 2006. But I'll digress for the third fucking time. So yeah, I can easily take their word on the Turok 2 port not being exactly the greatest, but then again, a lot of game consoles, the PC, whatever ports back then weren't exactly great, but then again, that's like one of the few things that hasn't really changed. Console to PC ports and vice versa aren't really that good nowadays, but it just really depends on the game. Now that I cleared my points about the Turok 3 Remaster, I can go back to doing what I like to do best, doing literally anything else besides ranting my ass off, because everyone is right except for me. This is ScapeROMFiles. I will see you all next file. Thanks for watching, and take care.